So in this Encore phase, what sort of financial thoughts would you give me to make me feel a little better about what's going on today and not fret so much? This new phase, this is what I have to try to redefine.
The lessons you're going to learn firsthand will apply to anybody in different areas of their own pursuits. Welcome to another episode of the next episode. Now, everybody listening and watching is not going to see the tweet, but I just tweeted out a picture of the notes and your readers. And this week we've got Morgan Housel's Psychology of Money. Shout out to Morgan out there for the phenomenal book. But I'm just letting them know that the readers and notes can only mean one thing, that we're getting ready to record another episode of the next episode.
Indeed. We're here, number 5, Jay.
Yep.
Goodness. Closing on the end of April, so that's 4 months into the Encore for me. It's been a lot of fun with you here. So again, we're on number 5. So this one, folks, we're going to take a slight deviation. You know, our previous episodes kind of a bantering back and forth, you and I, on the transition. Today we're going to put Jay a little bit in the hot seat. We'll kind of make him our guest for this episode, have some specific questions for Jay today. Specifically and obviously around his world of financial, advising and wisdom. But before we do that, the RLS Wealth family know of you and your, what I think to be a very unique philosophy on how you approach your financial planning and advising. And that is your philosophy of your passion for pursuing one's greater purpose, goals in life, and then how you blend that all in rather than just a plan to say, okay, here's the goal of you want to retire in how many years and we got to save how much money, so let's just do this. From knowing you now and being close, seeing how your philosophy really is what I'm going to call the core, guide to your, not only your life, but everything around you, including how you work in with your clients in the family of advising. So for the new listeners, maybe outside the family, could you give a little bit of a definition of your pursuit that you always talk about and how that blends into going after one's purpose in life and how you use that in financial planning before I hit you up on the questions?
Yeah. I think it's been an evolution of being an advisor. So you're talking about how it's hard to believe we're already in April. It's hard to believe that I'm coming up on my 18th year of being a financial advisor. But early on, it was really about the spreadsheets. When do you want to retire? Trying to grow the business, try to find clients to work with them. But maybe a little bit before I launched the firm. So in 2015, I launched RL Wealth Management at the time. Now it's RLS Wealth because of Silas. But I really think it's when I started my firm and I started to see what other advisors were doing, connecting with other advisors, learning about different ways to run a practice. And I have to give credit to my friend Scott Frank, who he introduced me to life planning. And when he explained to me what life planning was, the questions, the digging deeper, the asking whys, really getting at the root of how people view money and why they do the things they do with their money to ultimately try to help them create a life that aligned their values and their dollars, that really resonated with me because that was naturally the conversations that I was having with my clients. Growing up in the profession, I didn't really get any training on how to be a financial advisor. Got a little bit of training about how to sell some products, but everything else was kind of self-taught or learning from other people. So I naturally was going that direction anyways, but that just sped me up that was what people were looking for. And you fast forward to now, I am somebody who is led, like I can't do something if I'm not passionate about it. So that's just naturally who I am. So I bring that to the conversations I have with my clients, because if I'm not excited about the conversations I'm having with them, then I'm not going to be excited as an advisor and won't really enjoy what I do. So this evolution of bringing passion into the plan and trying to help clients live the life that they really want and figure out what they really want excites me, because it's a conversation that makes me excited, which I think makes me the best advisor, helps me do the best work, which ultimately drives the best outcome for my clients. And the cool thing about that is if I can do my job and help them figure out what their passions are, what they're most excited about, put that at the center of their plan rather than just aligning, put it at the center and build around it, then I'm doing something I enjoy, but I'm also helping them create a better life and ultimately be happier in the life that they live. To me, that's like, it's a win-win.
Right.
So what I've learned over the years is that as important as it is to plan for retirement, how much to save, how to invest, college, those goals that we're told we're supposed to have and those ages that we're supposed to hit them, that is important. That's always will be a part of the plan, but that doesn't guarantee that someone's going to live a life of minimal regret. And ultimately, that's what I'm after now. I want my clients or people who listen to this podcast or read my content, I want as many people as possible to look back on their life and have as minimal regret as possible. We're not going to be able to eliminate regret because we just can't do everything we want to. But I want to minimize it. And the regret that's left over, I hope that it's only regret in that I wanted to do this thing, but I just couldn't make it work because it was too big of a thing. Or at the time, it wasn't right. So for me, I talk about California all the time. Like, I'll look back and wish we spent time in California. It'll be a little bit of a regret, but it's not one that I regret because I didn't explore it. We looked at it, and it just didn't make sense from a standpoint of cost of living and doing the things we want to do. And so, yes, I didn't get a chance to live in California with my family, but it's not going to be a major regret, and it's one that I evaluated, and I didn't do it because it didn't make sense.
Right.
Versus if I never ran the numbers for our family, never explored it, then later on I can look back and say, you know what, I could have made that work, but I didn't even explore it. So very long-winded answers. We both get long-winded, but I just ultimately, spreadsheet answers aren't real answers that motivate people to follow a plan. It's important to know those things, but what people really want is they want to live the best life they can as possible. And managing a plan and managing recommendations to the spreadsheet, to the textbook, to the financial planning software doesn't always do that. Before we recorded, I had this very conversation with clients, and I think we're going to go down the path of exploring the wife potentially setting up a consulting business to leave the job that she's in now sooner because she has people asking her to come do this stuff for her anyways, which will afford her the opportunity to volunteer and do things more, which she defined in our meeting today as the thing that she's passionate about. Yeah. So if we didn't have that conversation and I didn't bring that to the plan, she wouldn't have the opportunity to even explore that until she was 57, 58, because that's what she thinks she has to do. But now we're going to go back to the numbers. We're going to really see what's most important, and can we get to a situation where she can leave, have more time, bring that thing she has a passion for in her life to be a bigger part of her life, and then not blow up their financial plan and still be able to hit the long-term goals that they want. To me, that's exciting planning. That's the only type of planning that's going to get me up to want to continue to be an advisor. And then this whole Pursuit brand that I'm building right now is to try to help people do that on scale. Right. Like, I can only be an advisor to so many people. I'm capped out. We're not taking on new clients at RLS Wealth. This is more about trying to get people to think more about what it is that they want. Are they living the life that they want? And I know plenty of advisors that are capable of helping them do that. So if you're looking for somebody to help that, I'm not the advisor for you anymore, at least not right now, because Pursuit needs my attention. My clients need my attention. I need my attention. My family needs my attention. But I know other advisors that have this mindset that can help people do that. But if you don't know what you really want, no advisor is going to be able to help you. And not every advisor, especially traditional advisors, have those conversations. So,
yeah. No, I appreciate that, Jay. And the reason for that is twofold. One, as I mentioned, I think it's a very unique perspective, philosophy, approach that you've taken and you use daily in your life, but also turn that into how you manage the expectations of your firm, its growth, the family members of the firm, and all around that. But also, as we started this podcast and this reality of helping folks consider transitioning into our encore phase, we got rid of the term retirement. So as we got into our encore phase, I'm appreciating that perspective and philosophy of yours more and more. And,
don't you wish you had it earlier?
Oh, absolutely.
That's the thing. That's why
absolutely.
This stuff is so. I think it's why these conversations, and sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
I got feedback in the last episode letting you talk more was a good thing. But I'm the guest, so I get to dominate today's conversation. No. But that's why this is so important. It's like you didn't get a chance to learn and be exposed to this stuff until retirement. Not that you get to do all of this early in your life, but if you know that this way of thinking is possible and that you can have these things sooner rather than later, you can take a career path that brings it to you sooner. And we're not told that. And part of the reason that there are not a lot of advisors that talk about the things that I talk about, and they're a growing amount, but the reason that there's not every advisor talking that way is that's not what we're trained. If you look at the history of our profession, you go back, it was stockbrokers selling stock. It was all based on the investments. And then it became about other products, mutual funds, annuities. It was all product sale, transactional. And then financial planning became a part of it. But truthfully, early in my career, the financial plan that the company I worked for provided me for, it was a sales tool. It wasn't, I mean, it used Monte Carlo simulation to run the forecast, but it also had a segment about why an annuity was best for everybody's plan. It was a sales tool. I used it to build confidence and kind of get the planning, but that's not why most people used it. They used it to make the sale. Here's some graphs to show you why you need this product. And then things started to move more towards advice. And as the profession continues to go more and more to the advice side, then it will become more about these types of conversations. Because as you get into advice, there's no product to sell. Then it's really about, well, what do we need this plan to do? And hopefully I'm able to have a small thumbprint on the profession of getting advisors to think bigger and put down the stereotypical questions and dive deep into the conversation. I'm not the first. You've got people like George Kinder with life planning. You've got Scott Frank, who is, I think, the next version of George Kinder. You've got Carl Richards. You've got Morgan Housel. You've got people like Josh Brown and Ben Carlson. And you've got all these people out there that are writing and talking about these things. You have Joy Leary, who's new to FinTwit, that is coming from the psychology, and she's working with Brian Portnoy. All these people that are bringing more behavioral finance to the financial advisor world, which will only be good. So I think that as the profession ages out and you get more and more younger advisors in that come from this generation that care more about these qualitative features and are willing to hustle more or do things differently on the quantitative side, that this type of planning is going to be more and more important. So I know advisors tune into All About Your Benjamins. If you're a financial advisor or thinking about becoming an advisor, like these soft skills and talking more about the whys and the values and the passions in someone's life, getting to that is much more important than when do you want to retire.
Right.
Because those answers will lead you to when they want to retire and why they want to retire then and to build the plan. So indirectly, you get those stereotypical questions when you ask the deeper questions.
Right. And in that, of course, Jay, I think is very important to how we've been kind of couching our conversations and discussions in our sessions here, and why I wanted to lead with this in episode 5 was to circle back a little bit on this financial piece, because that's just one of the little components you've got to assess of when you decide to retire. But we also talked about in I think it was episode 2 of ours, that kind of a new, not that it's a new phase, but we'll label it the new phase of sort of a pre-retirement phase. So folks stepping back and going, well, as we also talked, our longevity is pushed out. We address the matter of the fact that we're living so much longer. We have the opportunity, as we dubbed this our encore phase of life, to maybe start new careers or do things we've always wanted to do with the luxury of not having to work inside of corporate America. So as I said, I'm appreciating that more and more. And as I'm transitioning and continuing my kind of settling into this phase of life, I'm beginning to better appreciate that, mainly driven by our conversations and us doing these sessions, but also, hanging around you in a little different way now, rather than just being father-son, beginning to feel more comfortable about this phase of my life being that new opportunity, rather than settling into being, oh my, this is that time of life where I've got to try to always do something, or how do I fill my time? I don't want it to be that academic, as we spoke in the past. I want it to be more creative. I want it to be more enthusiasm. And so on that note, which first of all, just my plan on what we're going to do today, just throw it out the window.
Hold up. Hey, well, my be thinking we don't.
But
Your conversation is taking me slightly different.
That's what makes a good podcast. So hold on. That makes a good podcast. 1, but 2, I know that you saw that I was looking at my phone. I was looking at my phone because I wanted to see if the number 5 had any relevant meaning, because you multiple times mentioned that you want to do this episode 5. So I just thought that 5 is interesting because the meaning of it, like if you believe in these angel numbers, it was talking about it means balance. So number 5 should be putting your life in balance. But there's another one that I thought was interesting as I go to email real quick. It talked about how Well, keep going. I'll
Yeah.
find it.
So with that,
okay. Sorry.
It's
Number
like-
5 is also a symbol of individualism, courage, and important life lessons that you've learned through your own experience. So, kind of the evolution of why I bring passion to planning and it's so important to me. It's an evolution of my individualism as a financial advisor, the courage to talk about things differently and do things my way and not just follow the crowd or what I was trained, and then life lessons that I've learned from being an advisor and in there, and then kind of putting my own spin on things. So
Right.
I think there's a reason that 5 is the episode and there's these hidden meanings behind it.
there we go. Again, proving that point. And again, subconsciously or the fact that threw it out there and it came back. So staying with your line of philosophy there, why I decided to come to this particular topic today. So maybe to get us back just a little bit, because I did want to attack, obviously, this opportunity that we now have. I'm going to say not so much me a little bit because I've left corporate America, but since we've talked a little bit about this pre-retirement, I'll just call it craze of folks going, well, maybe I just don't need to retire now, but I want to continue to do things a little differently. And maybe that means, as we spoke, cutting back maybe my level of involvement in the company I work for, maybe working smaller hours, whatever that pre-retirement might mean to folks, right? But they're still going to be working inside of a corporate structure rather than, your client thinking about, okay, I'm just going to do what I need to do to start my consulting firm. So if we could just focus very quickly on, let's just call it the pre-retirement thought process of kind of deciding to still stay working inside of a company, but maybe tailoring your new role for some period of time to be less than what you are today. So you cut back on responsibilities or you cut back on your hours. What would you consider to maybe be some key points to focus on if I'm thinking about, well, instead of me retiring at 65, I'm going to do this pre-retirement and cut back, talk to my manager and company about working maybe only this kind of capacity or that. Should I think about changing any of my focus on how I would think about what I do with retirement planning, or do I stay the course with where I'm at in this phase? And likewise, you talked about, I'll just call it the sideways S on how we look at savings, where I was trying to flip the script on the model of not doing too much when we were younger, but spending more time with family. And you talked about the compounding effect and how that comes around, and maybe now that we're working later in life and live longer, I could spend more. But in pre-retirement time and phase, if I'm thinking about that as an individual, should I think differently about how I plan my financial for retiring, or do I still try to be as aggressive as I can be? Do I think about stepping outside and being a little bit more aggressive at this time, or do I still get, as it would be me, again, my vulnerability would be, I would still try to remain conservative at that time of my life, right? So what would your thoughts be on something like that if I were asking you, Jay, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I'm not going to retire as I thought. I'm going to do this pre-retirement thing. But what would you say to me at that time if I was coming to you about this phase? Would I do anything different?
I'd first ask you why, but let's get through
Yeah.
the why and get to it. So one of the first things, and this exercise I would encourage anybody to do that's nearing retirement or even a change for that matter, is whatever, let's retirement for the case, you have a retirement income in mind. I need this much money to live off on a monthly basis. Most people when they retire, they live on less than what they're used to making. So the psychology of it is, you go into retirement, let's say you're making $150,000 a year, you're going to retire, you think that you're going to need, you're going to retire, and I'm not going to have $150,000 a year, what am I going to do? Well, first off, you don't need $150,000 a year to most likely, unless you're spending every penny, but let's assume you're saving and other things. You don't need $150,000 to maintain your lifestyle because you're saving in your 401k, you have other deductions coming out, maybe your savings into savings still, and you can dwindle down. So the exercise is, whatever that number is, if you say you need $5,000 a month to live off of, then for 6 months or a year, set your bank account at $5,000 a month on the first of the month and see if you can actually live the life that you want in today's terms on that. Not having the extra, not doing savings, just start a brand new checking account every month, put $5,000 in it, use a debit card for the years, forego your points on your credit cards, just to see, can you realistically live off of that? Or are you forgetting about the birthdays that come up and the holidays and this that happens with the house. Like maybe you actually need $7,000 a month to live off of. And if you go through this fake retirement living for a year, you actually get to see what are the things you're forgetting about when you're doing your budget for your financial plan, because we all forget about these expenses. And no matter how good you are about tracking your spending, there's always things that we don't account for when we do the mental accounting of here's how much I'm living off of. So just pretend like you're retired from a year from an income standpoint and live off of that fixed number that you think you can live off of to see if that's realistic. Because that number is really what drives the success of the plan from a like software standpoint. Can we maintain $5,000 a month every year for 30 years, growing at 3% average inflation? Yes, I know it's 8.5 now, but that's what the software does. And we can play with that. I use Right Capital. It's a great software. I can go in there and on the fly say, well, what if inflation averages 4% more a year? And it will show me immediately what the impact is to the strength of the plan. So we have the tools as advisors to be able to account for these things we're seeing going on. But I think it's the first thing. I think one of the things is we underestimate what we spend. And I also think there are individuals who overestimate what they spend. So there's not always the clarity there to just live it, pretend it, and then be honest with it. So then after that period of time leading up to that phase, you can have a conversation with your advisor. This is how much I really need to live. I thought it was 5. It's really 7 when I look about all the things that go on. That would be the first thing, is to pretend to be retired from an income standpoint.
Yeah, that's great point. Great exercise.
Now, as far as like that let's say, should I do this pre-retirement or should I stay? I think part of it depends on how bad does it suck. Like, what's your reason for wanting to leave? Why do you want to do a pre-retirement versus sticking it all the way out? Because there were conversations you and I had over the past few years that I just said, gut it out. Like, you're making good money. You're making the job more difficult for yourself. Just gut it out and keep on making the money, because as much as I want you to follow your passions, sometimes the finances require you to make that income. So if you're in a situation, if you can mentally tell yourself, I'm going to stay 3 more years instead of doing this pre-retirement thing and gut it out, but I'm going to treat this as a business decision. The business is using me. Well, I'm going to use the business. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a good job. I'm going to do all the things I'm supposed to do. I'm going to be a good teammate, but I'm not going to take the stresses of other people not doing their job on my plate, which was what your downfall was, is that you were the perfectionist that you are. You were worrying about other people not doing their job and trying to pick up the slack for them, or them not living up to the standards you hold for yourself. You can't force people to live to your standard. And what I just wanted you to realize is, all right, clock in, clock out for 3 years. I wouldn't want you to do this forever, but later in life, make that good salary. Don't bear that extra stress, because at the end of the day, the company doesn't care about you. They'll let you go in a heartbeat if they need to. Treat them in the same way. Again, don't do a bad job. Earn the money, but don't do anything extra just for 3 years. And then you get that 3 years of savings and go. So if it doesn't suck bad, maybe the answer is you stay there and you treat it as a business and you shut things off. You don't work after hours. When you get done, you're done. So that in that evening time, now you have the time to do the things that you want to do to bring that passion in your life a little bit earlier.
Right.
The volunteer, the working out, the taking care of yourself, whatever it might be, that's what you do in the evening instead of continuing to work past the hours. Like, work from home is one of the best things that happen for companies, because they expect us, well, not me, they expect you all to work 24/7. You can never stop. I mean, I choose to work a lot, but that's me choosing to do it. It's not somebody telling me to. Now you can work from home at any time. Emails hitting your phone. Slack is binging in the background, and you keep on working, and there's no, that divide's not there. I just wanted you to shut it off and say, hey, this is transactional. I'm clocking in, I'm clocking out, I'm giving my all during the time I'm there, and I'm not worrying about other people. Give me my paycheck, let me save, let me shore some things up so that I can fully be done and write off. So I would look at it as, if you can stick it out, stay with the benefits, stay with the higher income, if it's not creating a huge drag and making you unhappy. If it's making you unhappy, then maybe that's when you get creative and say, all right, Mr. and Mrs. Boss, I'm going to propose this. I'm going to do this, this, and this. I'll take less money. You don't have to pay for my benefits. I'm 65 now. I can go on Medicare. You can get creative with these things to buy you a little bit more time. But I would say, if that's the direction you're going, I would much rather see somebody find something to make that income that they really enjoy, rather than staying in an environment that they kind of want out, but they can't fully get out of, and they got 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Try to find a way to get 2 feet out and go do something that you're going to enjoy more, if it's just about getting a little bit of extra money.
Yeah. Thanks, Jay. Those are a few great perspectives on this whole pre-retirement, because when we read about it or we hear about it, it's more or less the idea, the fact that folks are living longer, that longevity curve grows out. What do we do with that next phase of our life that we've talked about, and the idea of what's best for the individual. When you read it, it's just about, well, just talk to your employer about working less hours, taking less responsibility, and not quitting, not going to retirement. But there could be all kind of pitfalls and traps with that as well. And I think what's important to us as we're transitioning and going into this phase of our life is to consider those points that you raised, and some thought-provoking directions and conversations to have with ourselves, I think, and then also with our spouses or partners, and doing the right thing, because we have that opportunity today, where I think a few years ago we probably could not do that, have that conversation with employers, but I think we can today. So I think that's important for individuals to consider as they're looking at this, if they're coming up to that point in time where they think they can retire. I think that pre-retirement phase concept is a good one to have, and your thoughts, I think, are great to examine as we're going through that, and what direction we take it, versus okay, I'm done.
Another pre-retirement thing, this is not as exciting, but if you think about pre-retirement, can maybe be like the last 5 years leading up to when you're going to leave your job. Focusing on, if you were able to do a good job saving earlier, and again, the compound interest working for you, if you get later in your career to where you don't need to save as much to top off the retirement savings, or you're going to go do a second career type thing, doing maybe some of the bigger expensive things that you want to do while you're still working. So, a lot of people, if we're talking retirement, want to take trips. Well, if you can take the bigger, more expensive trips leading up to retirement, if it fits into the planning, then take that European summer trip while you're still working and have the income to pay for it. Just don't put as much into your retirement if you've saved enough to be able to do that. That way you're not getting to retirement and then taking a big distribution from your IRA or a big expense early on in retirement, because there's this thing called sequence of returns, but it also is sequence of distribution. So the sequence of returns says that two portfolios can have drastically long-term outcomes depending on the returns that they get. So somebody retiring into a bear market has a higher likelihood of running out of money than someone who retires into a bull market, even if they average the same return over life. And I may not have done a good job of explaining that, but basically, if you think about, if you retire into a big dip, even if you average the same average return over 20 years as somebody who retired into it up, the fact that you retired into a dip and you're taking money out, you don't have a chance to recoup. So whether that is the market taking a big chunk out or it's you taking a big chunk out to go travel, maybe do that travel, the bigger trip early on, and then save the camping trips or the driving trips for early in retirement when it's not going to be as expensive and you can do those much easier. And then the other thing would be also like projects. If you've got a home, we know homes are expensive and there's things you need to do, and you can forecast out and say, hey, we haven't had a new roof for 20 years. Maybe we should take care of that before we get into retirement so we don't have that big expense. Now, you can't always plan those perfectly, and there's ways to plan for that and things you can do, home equity line of credit and different things that you can absorb it. But if you know there's these big things and the main goal is to accomplish those and live those experiences, does it matter whether you do it while you're still working, if you can get the time to go off, or when you do it in retirement? My guess is it's more about the experience, less about it happening in retirement or happening in the years leading up to retirement. So if you can pull some of those bigger expenses into your later years of working when you have the higher income, and if you offset that expense with maybe saving a little bit less, assuming the plan affords for it, that's another kind of planning and strategic way of placing things and when they happen to be a little bit more efficient and optimal.
Okay. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's spot on, I think. Because there's so much to consider as I'm now living this life of the Encore, and still having some, I'll just say, some thought process of looking back and saying, okay, what could I have done different? Here I go again. Mm-hmm. What could I have done different? And trying not to do that, if you would, this time, because the reality, Jay, does afford that to still happen. Like I made this decision. it seemed to be the right decision, the right time, all things lined up. But as always, there are those unexplained phenomena that happen, mistakes you may make, and you start. At least I do. So again, I'm putting myself out here in my vulnerability, and that's fine because it's for me to learn and others to learn from me. To not fall into that trap of going, okay, could I go back? Should I go back and do a pre-retirement? Because you can do those things now, right? I mean, even though I've started, collecting Social Security, you can create a pause and go back, and that thought process has come around me a little bit, like, okay, well, because of this crazy time, this extraordinary time that we're living in today, my mind goes, okay, to your very point, the fact that this longevity is here, this is where I'm at. I don't go back to maybe what I was doing or where I was, but is this where I take a pause and maybe go back and start to work? And the only reason I'm having this conversation today is this is a thought process I want people to really begin to appreciate and get into as early as they can. Or if you're here like I am, that knowing I think those thoughts will be quite natural because, and this is why I brought the book you gave me, The Psychology of Money, right, by Morgan Housel. So I brought that because there was a comment in there, to put my readers on, as you alluded to earlier, that was very interesting. And in it, he talks about seduction of pessimism is the name of the chapter. But the statement I'm going to read is that it says, pessimism reduces expectations, narrowing the gap between possible outcomes and outcomes you feel great about. Maybe that's why it's so seductive. Expecting things to be bad is the best way to be pleasantly surprised when they're not. So I'm thinking... It's
also the best way to guarantee that those bad things are going to happen.
Right.
It's funny, so what they don't know is we had a conversation before we started, and that's why I smirked if you're watching this when you talked about this crazy times that we're in. I'm like, but is it really that crazy? Like, is what we're experiencing now any more crazy than what's happened over your lifetime? Like, look what you've lived through. Vietnam War, multiple recessions, Berlin Wall coming down, like all of these things that it's always crazy. Now, the difference is now we have social media. It's always in your face. Everybody's got an opinion. But clients talk about their theories and things they think are going to happen. And, this stuff is always there. I'm going to give Michael Batnick put together this chart, Reasons to Sell. It's one of my all-time favorite charts to look at. It shows the market over a 15, 20-year period. I forget what it is. And the market goes up and to the right, but you see the ups and downs, but you see the events that happened. And everybody's so sure that, Russia and Ukraine is going to crash the market, we're never going to recover, and the dollar is never going to be valuable, and all this stuff. And these narratives are true, but I think these narratives have been going on forever. They sound different, but it's still a pessimistic narrative that ultimately doesn't play out. And life requires you to have some faith and some optimism that things are going to be better in the future. And despite all the craziness and the negativity that's out there, and that the U.S. is on the brink of failure and all this horrible stuff, our life today is better than it was 5 years ago. It was better than it was 10 years ago. You look at the advancements in technologies and people being cured of things. Our life, you would not go back in life 15 years ago and trade. Today is better than it was 15 years ago. Now, there's things that are imperfect, that aren't great, but today is no more crazy than it was. It just looks different. And people are talking about it more, and we see it more. Like, I went and saw The Godfather with BJ and Joe to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And there were moments where I'm like, man, like back then seemed so much more simple. Families were tighter. That'd be a cool time period to live in. But I think about all the cool shit I get to do today that I wouldn't be able to do because of the time back then. So yes, it was more simple, but it doesn't make it better. There's a lot of luxuries that we have today that I wouldn't have had back then. Yeah. And the mob's running around controlling everything. And sure, we have a mob today of a different form, but I hate that conversation of that today is so crazy and things are so bad. They're not.
Well, that's going to kind of segue perfectly into the last point and questions I had for you today.
Before you go, and what's the point of being pessimistic?
Yeah.
Like, how does that change things? So you think the world's going to end? Well, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
And how is that going to make your life any better?
Right.
I'm not saying run around and be blindly optimistic and be foolish, but what is the point of focus on these negative stories that might happen? There's 99, 100 positive stories that are more likely to happen that you could focus on. Why would you not focus on that? And you can't convince me that the people that you know that are always negative and always have all these bad things happening to them, it's because all they see is negative, and that energy attracts negative stuff. Like, my life's not perfect. We've had trials and tribulations. Ange had a brain tumor. Like, we've had bad things happen to our family. Kristen got burned when she was in 2nd grade. But a lot of good things happened to me and my family. And sure, there might be a little bit of luck of where I was born into and the family I was born into. And there are these societal things that help out. But I know a lot of other people who look like me, who came from similar families, same demographics, that have totally different trajectories. And I'm convinced that part of it is mindset and the way they view things. Like, I'm always going to find the silver lining, and that's going to help me get through whatever that trial is a lot quicker, and it's going to start pulling good things to me. Energy attracts it. Negative energy attracts negative stuff. Positive energy attracts positive stuff. It doesn't mean a positive, optimistic person is going to always have the perfect life. Right. It just means that when those obstacles come, they're going to get through them a lot faster. Right. And I know that that sounds potentially deaf to somebody who's going through, like tone deaf to somebody who's going through something hard, but change your perspective and change your outlook, and I promise you things will get better. You have to be optimistic in life. Otherwise, what's the point of living?
Yeah. No.
That had nothing to do with today's conversation, but you got me on a soapbox.
Yeah, well, I did, and I was just going to mention that to those of you that are just listening, and when you get to view this, you'll see not only hear the inflection of Jay's voice that just went to a high level because of his enthusiasm about that topic, because I've gotten him to do that before on the very same matter. But you also see when you view this, the physical change in him and his posture and whatnot with it, which is great, which I applaud. But again, just back to Morgan's statement here, he says, and after what I read, he also says, which ironically is something to be optimistic about. Mm-hmm. So to your point, but to get us back a little bit so we can close up here. But to that point, Jay, is today any more different than, and I'll just go back to 2000 and 2008, when we kind of had, crazy market conditions and investments were doing what they did at that time. And again, 2000, 2008, me being much younger, when that was all happening, I was able to sit back and just be, okay, I've got time to recover. But today, if, I'm in the early phases of this encore phase of my life, as are others who are listening and viewing. But what would you? I mean, you've already said what you want to answer my question, but I'm going to ask the question again, anyways. This is an extraordinary time, and there are some factors I think that exist today that weren't in prior years that maybe serve as possible total disruptions and things that we don't know because we don't have crystal balls. But for those of us in early phases of our encore that look at what we've done and our savings, and you hear, like you said, we hear it 24/7, and it's always what we hear is more pessimistic than optimistic.
It's because that drives ratings,
right? But what would you? I think I know what you're going to say, but I want you to say it again, or maybe close up on it. But what would you tell us, those of us in early phases of our encore, about what should we really kind of pay attention to, and what's the noise that we should put aside to make us feel a little better about, hey, I don't want to do anything too crazy. Like, I asked you the other day, what should I do? I can't afford to lose, 40%. Well, you gave me the answer, and I'm not going to say what you said, but in this phase, what should someone like myself, how do I get myself to be a little bit more comfortable with not making some erratic moves or decisions, even though the world is kind of a little extraordinary today? Because you said we don't know what's going to happen. What's going to be is going to be. Mm-hmm. We're so much outside of our control. But so in this encore phase, what sort of financial thoughts would you give me to make me feel a little better about what's going on today and not fret so much?
First off, I'd have you look at Batnick's chart. Yep. Remind you of those events that you lived through, and even show you, hey, there's 2000, there's 2008, there's COVID on the chart. Yes, there's the drop, but as you step back over 10, 15, 20 years, it's not as scary as it looked in the moment. And that's not to dismiss the feelings that people have. Like, money is emotional. Like, that's why I have a job. You can go run spreadsheet numbers all on your own, but being able to help people manage their emotions, put things together, and line things up is important. So it's not to dismiss that, but you've been through this before. The other thing I would say is, do you plan on dying in the next 5 years?
No.
Probably not.
No.
There's nothing that we know of today that suggests that you only have 5 years to live. Then I would say, then yes, we need to be more mindful with your portfolio, depending on how your plan is situated and how much you have saved, that we need to have some money or funds that we have access to in the near future to give you your income that you need to live off of. I don't want to be in a position to where we have to sell stocks if the market's down and you're down 20%. I don't want to be forced to sell stocks for income that I know you need. So the tough thing in today's environment, and this is something that a lot of advisors are talking about, and we're trying to figure out what's the best course of action is, bonds are supposed to be the area of safety. 60-40 portfolio, 70-30 portfolio. The reason you invest in bonds is not for the growth. We've had growth in bonds, but that's not why. You invest it for when the market goes down, bonds go up. Well, in a rising interest rate, bonds go down. Inflation's not good either. So now we're in this situation where we would normally park these funds. That's not a guaranteed safe spot either. Year to date, some bond funds are down 7-8% as well. So our safety area in the short term is not that safe. So maybe that means we hold more cash, but inflation's 8.5%. There's no perfect way to do things. That's why having the planning software is helpful, so we can model things out and we can look at the impact long term. If this continued, what's the risk? So we can make some adjustments on the fly. But I would tell you, with all of the news and all of the fear, and the fear drives to the market, to our portfolio, we're going to run out of money because of what's happening today. Yes, that impact of what the news might impact the next 6 months or 9 months of growth or lack thereof. But I still think in 10, 15, 20 years, the odds are in our favor that your money is going to continue to grow. Things will recover. Prices will get low enough that investors will come back in, will drive the markets back up. I believe in that still. If I didn't, I would quit, because as an advisor and a fiduciary, I can't put clients in a situation that I believe is not going to work out the way it has in the past. Now, I don't know that the market will average 7 or 8%, whatever the favorite quoted rate is. I don't know if it's going to average that, but I think in 10, 15, 20 years, your investments will be higher than they are today, regardless of what happens in the next 3 or 4 months. So what we need to do is thinking about your plan is figuring out, well, how much money do you need on a monthly basis? Where can we put a year, 18 months, depending on your comfort level, that we can put that's relatively quote unquote safe, but also may have a little bit of inflation hedge to it? What can we do? And then the rest of it has time to recover. So if it does go down, you don't have to stop living. We've got time for those funds to recover, which I believe they will recover. 2008 took 18 months. I don't remember how long 2000 took, but it wasn't forever. If you have a diversified portfolio, I think that is a key too. The people who were invested in the tech stocks in 2000 only in the NASDAQ, that took a lot longer to recover.
Right.
But if you have a diversified portfolio, that's the point of diversification, is you're never at the top, you're never at the bottom, you're somewhere in the middle, you're going to fall, but you're also going to bounce back.
Right.
You go all in, a little bit more risky. So I would tell you, you are still in a position to take on risk. I could make the case that you could have a portfolio that's still all equity and have no bonds in it and not be too risky if you're able to weather those ups and downs. You're not able to do that, which is perfectly fine.
Right.
Maybe the answer is in the short term, it's higher equity exposure, and then it's just cash, and we cut out bonds for a little while. So I don't know the answer to that yet, because we haven't really experienced this before. So we are figuring this out. That's why this is a little bit of an art form, because there is some science to it, the numbers, but life events and then sometimes economic events put situations out there we haven't seen before. So I would tell you, long story short, yes, you still need to be invested. Show me another asset class that's going to keep up with inflation over the next 20, 30 years, because I think you'll still be alive. But grandma's 90. Like, you don't have the heart issue that Pubba had. Pubba was already dead. But that's because he smoked and worked in the steel mill. So everything in your family heritage says you're going to live into your 90s. So you've got 30 years. Go back to the beginning of your career when you started saving and investing. Were you worried about your retirement savings for retirement when you were starting?
Not. No.
It's the same time frame.
Right.
We just need to make sure that there's enough money in the short term that while the market does its things, if it's not favorable, you're okay from an income standpoint. And the reality of it is, if things go to shit, I don't know where else. Like, if your portfolio went to zero, You just step back and think about, what does that mean? That means the largest companies in the world are failing and not recovering. Yeah. Apple, Google, Amazon, the banks, everything's going to zero. Land, food, bullets, like that is going to be currency. That's going to be valuable there. And I don't recommend going and loading up on that because I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. And if somebody truly, truly believes that, then that's not somebody for me to help because I don't know how to help somebody that has that viewpoint because I don't have that viewpoint. Yeah. So you've got the time. We're going to have a conversation in 10 years on this podcast about how crazy times are then, and we're going to pull this old one up from the archives, and it's going to be the same thing. The market bounced around. You were okay. You've got Social Security. Mom has Social Security. You're working here. You have skills that if you had to go back, you could go make money again in a greater scale if you needed to. You may not want to, but if push comes to shove, you've got to go do what you got to do, and then you get back on track. Right. So the beauty but also the curse in that, and everything that a financial advisor does and what comes into financial planning is there is no perfect answer. There's no right answer. There are answers that are more optimal in different ways. There's a better tax efficient way. There's a better growth of the portfolio way. There's a better way to spend down your assets and leave nothing for your kids. There's always options. And as human beings, we like certainty. So it's hard to go into a plan where you've given up the majority of your income. You're forced to live off of the savings you accumulated, Social Security, and some little part-time. That's scary, but we have flexibility. We have different levers to pull. Some are more desirable than others, but there's options. Yeah. And there's no perfect thing. And I think the fact that there's no perfect plan and no perfect way to go about it, I think that's beautiful because that should give you, the client, confidence to go into this to say, hey, like we have what we need. We don't know what the future holds, but we're fluid. The plan is fluid. We're able to adjust. We may have to make some sacrifices sometimes, but if we're making sacrifices, we're still better off than a lot of other people and we'll be okay. Yeah. So if 1 year, because the market's down, we don't get to take that big trip, we do it next year, so is that really that bad? So like you didn't get to take the trip 1 year. That's not, you're not homeless. Right. You're not, dying. So I just think that like perspective is important, but this isn't a perfect profession. It's impossible. And everybody's plan is different. I think the key is just knowing that you've saved, you've prepared, you've done everything you can, analyzing, using what we have at our disposal to make sure you're not walking into a situation that's doomed. Yeah. What more? You can only control what you can control. Yeah. And as new information comes in, maybe we adjust the plan, maybe we adjust spending, we adjust the portfolio. But I think you always need to be invested, and I don't think you can afford to get too conservative, especially today, because getting more conservative in traditional forms is going into an asset class that most likely we know is going to be declining because it's bonds, or going into cash, which we know is losing 8% to inflation. The market, although we know it goes ups and downs, historically keeps up with inflation, right, beats inflation, does what we need to do. Yeah. So I don't think that you dial back your risk unless you're losing sleep, it's causing you distress, it's impacting your health, then you've got to figure something else out.
Right. No, great point. Thanks, Jay. And I appreciate you going into that, and how I wanted to couch that is exactly how you ended it for me today and on this particular matter that I wanted to address in our episode, particularly since that is an important part of when we get to this phase. Mm-hmm. We have to worry about it. I mean, we always have to worry about it, but I think when we're, if you would, younger, we immediately have that perspective of, well, I have that X period of time for things to be up and down. I can live with the long term. And I just have to keep reminding myself, as I'm hopeful that those listening and viewing remind yourself as well, that even though we are at this phase, I'm at 66 and in my Encore phase, as we have addressed, the longevity is there. So we have that at 30 years. I now have that time so that whatever does decline, the recovery is for me now in this phase of life as it was back in 2000, 2008.
And we've also got the part of your portfolio that we do for retirees that is trend following a little bit, so that if the long-term trend of the market's down, the portfolio gets more conservative. When the market's going up, we go back. Right. So there is some built-in portfolio management that you have that gets you more conservative when you might be a little bit more nervous, to ease those concerns so you don't do something drastic. But if we're in a raging bull market, we're not sacrificing growth to protect against something that may or may not happen. Right. So there's things like that you can, work with an advisor who has those types of strategies that can kind of again, work with the behavioral side. Because when I did the back testing and worked on building that strategy out and reading the books and everything, when I ran the numbers, the tactical strategy wasn't that much different than if we just bought and hold. But the ride was a lot different. And I've decided that smoothing the ride out without sacrificing the growth was better for retirees. They'd be able to sleep easier at night knowing they're more conservative, seeing that they're not down as much as their peers or what they hear on the news. And then when things get better, being back in to have good growth. Right. So there's those things you can do as well.
Right. Oh, I appreciate that. And likewise, Jay, appreciate, you running this sort of way with me today on this podcast and being in the guest seat and kind of quizzing you a little bit so we could hear more directly to some very pointed questions about the different phases and thoughts that we should have at this phase. So.
I thought of one more strategy thing going into retirement. So this is where working with an advisor, totally out there, but I thought of one more thing. So not financial advice, talk to an advisor, but strategy point. Insurance is a big thing that a lot of people in their pre-retirement phase may have to worry about. You go do the part-time job, maybe you lose your benefits, and now you have to pay for health insurance if you're not 65 yet. And I can speak from experience in Indiana, the exchange plans, they suck. They're super expensive, deductibles are high, coverage isn't that great, but that may be all you can get depending on your situation. Another thing that you can do in that pre-retirement phase, if you've saved and you've got different options, different levers to pull, is those plans, the one good thing about them is they have the subsidies. So if you are able to shift your income and lower your income enough, then you can get some subsidies and your insurance costs may go down significantly. Now, I can't speak to the care of what you're going to get or have access to from that plan, but that's another planning opportunity going in is, okay, if I know that I'm concerned about health insurance costs and I have to go to the exchange, can I look at my finances and shift where I'm taking money from to lower my income to then be able to get a subsidy to then be able to lower my expenses, which will give me better spending needs. So right. Another thing like that. So there's all these little nuances to planning that you could miss and probably be okay, but working with somebody who knows the creativity behind the plan of, hey, go take that part-time job. You're going to save into your 401k. You're going to lower your income. We've built up some savings because we've planned for this. We're going to spend this cash down over these years, keep your income real low, and now you're going to pay nothing for insurance, and you just happen to have your doctors in the right plan. Like there's things like that go into planning that could be a part of the pre-retirement planning as well.
Yeah. Great
Sorry
point,
to bring
Jay.
another plan at the very
that's
end.
Great. That's what we wanted to try to do here. So again, thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. For those of you listening and viewing, thank you for taking the time to spend with us again today. Always remember to never quit. Keep pursuing. Still Justin's phase there, and make the most of your day. Thanks again, and take care.
See you in the next episode.